Welcome back. You're watching 101. We're speaking with lawyer, activist and wife of former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, Cherie Blair. Looking at defining moments in your life, I guess one of them would have to be when the working class girl from Liverpool met up with the middle class public school boy when you were both training to be lawyers. How was Tony Blair in those days?
Well, it wasn't a very auspicious start, really, because we both met when we were both going for a scholarship to do our professional exams. And because he's Blair and I'm Booth, they did it alphabetically. So we sat next to each other. And I then discovered that he was going to be working in the same firm as I was. And I wasn't very happy about that. And at that time, Tony had... You may have seen pictures of him in Oxford where he had hair down to here. But just before he went to the interview, because he was starting at the bar, which is a very conservative with a small C profession, he decided to cut his hair, and he had it cut very drastically. So he had this very short haircut, and he bought himself a very traditional suit. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is very much one of these public school Oxbridge types that I really hadn't come across before. But I soon realised there was more to him than met the eye, and at least his hair grew.
Well, I was going to say, did he talk guitar talk with you as well? Because he was quite keen on that.
He was very keen on guitar. But the funny thing is, once we got to know each other, the thing that we talked about, I mean, we did actually talk, sadly or not, I don't know, quite a lot about politics, because we shared common interest in politics and in left-of-centre politics. And the other things we talked about was actually to do with talking about God and religion. And those are two passions that we still continue to share today.
Now, did he express any ambitions? Was being Prime Minister even on the cards at that time?
No, and I think that if you'd asked people at the time in 1976, they might have said it was me who was more interested in politics than Tony. That's not to say Tony was already a member of the Labour Party. It's not true that he joined the Labour Party because of me, but he joined the Labour Party already. But he was just, I think, cleverer at keeping that quiet, because it wasn't necessarily seen as an advantage if you were going to get a position in a law firm.
You yourself actually headed down that political path for a while. You ran for the seat in North Thanet.
Between 80 and 83, Tony and I were both looking for seats, and there was a time for about 6 to 9 months when Tony was the candidate's husband. And this was a role which I sometimes had to remind him of later on, because he found it's not easy being the spouse of a candidate, even less so being the spouse of an MP or a minister. And there was a wonderful time when we had to go to see my agent, the person who was running my campaign, just before the 83 general election. And we had lunch, and at the end of the lunch, the agent said, "Tony, would you mind leaving Cherie and I to talk politics, and would you mind helping my wife with the washing up?"
Oh. Now, is he quite competitive in that way? Because you again share those common interests. It might draw that.
I think possibly we are quite competitive in the nicest possible way.
Now, you've had, obviously, a very active life, both of you, both in a political sense, obviously in 10 Downing Street, and post-political as well. How have you handled such an active life on the road? I mean, how has it affected the way you've run your family life?
I think that I sometimes say I must be a tribute to the powers of adrenaline. And I've been very lucky. I talk often about flexible working, and because as a barrister I am self-employed, it does mean that apart from the time when I'm in court, when you're sitting in court between 10 and 4, then you have to be there, and obviously you have to prepare for that, but you can prepare at different times. So I tend to be a nighttime person, and if I would be in court and then I go home and make dinner and see the children before they went to bed, then I would go back and work until midnight or whatever, preparing for the next day. Tony, on the other hand, is a morning person, so he would like to get up early and do things early in the morning. With me, I like my bed in the morning.
Now, of course, talking of defining moments, your youngest of 4, Leo, who was born in May 2000, was conceived almost by accident. I've heard you tell the story. Just share it briefly with us, because I know it involves a visit to the Queen as well.
It does. Well, as I said, I was this working class girl made good, and in 1998 we went for the first time to stay with the Queen at Balmoral, which traditionally every year the Prime Minister does. And when I got there, I discovered that I'd been allocated a lady's maid, which was quite daunting because she was quite a young girl and she kept insisting on curtsying and calling me my lady. So which of course I'm not entitled to be called my lady. But one of the things she did was unpack my luggage, including my rather old and battered toiletry bags, some of which hadn't seen the light of day for a long time. And I came back after dinner to discover that she'd lovingly taken everything out of this toiletry bag and laid it across the dressing table. Now, there were some things in that toiletry bag that I didn't want. I was 43 then. She was only 21, a 21-year-old girl ready to see. And so the next year when we came to Balmoral, I thought, oh, forewarned is forearmed. So I got myself a brand new kit so that no one would see any of the sort of raggedy old bits. And I thought, well, we're only going for a weekend and I'm 44 by this time, so I'd just take a chance. And God was laughing at me, and 9 months later, along came Leo.
Yeah, there you go. Now, there was much attention placed on your faith and obviously Tony Blair's faith in the media during your time at 10 Downing Street. Do you think that was even relevant for the public? I mean, is it something that should even concern the public? I
don't think that in Britain that religion and really plays an overt role in politics. But people, of course, are legitimately interested in the character of their politicians and what sort of people they are. And of course, it's very much part of Tony, and that he has this belief. And but it isn't at the forefront of his political persona. Whereas, of course, in America, it's completely different.
I was going to say, growing up in Britain, I certainly didn't feel it was important. I guess it was also around the time that people were looking at George Bush as someone who was perhaps almost crusading, and so they linked it as well. But I was just wondering whether it was something that you felt might have been even relevant for them. In terms of your views on what your defining moments are, what do you see as those defining moments in your life?
The defining moments in my life? Well, actually, one was when I was 8 years old and my father left us, because it was a huge scandal, because he was well known in the community. My grandmother's cousin was the parish priest. This was in 1963 in Catholic part of Liverpool. I mean, people didn't get divorced, and that made a huge impact on me. And it was as a result of that the teachers suggested that I should be moved up a year to keep me out of mischief. And that was when, I started to get this reputation as being a clever girl, which has kind of stuck to me ever since.
Presumably walking into 10 Downing Street for the first time.
Well, that was an extraordinary moment. Though, of course, that was a moment for the whole family, but particularly for Tony. But, when you see that front door so often, and for that door to open and for you to go in and to realise that you were going to be living in this historical place is a most extraordinary one, as is, of course, the time when, for the last time, the door closes too.
What about triumphs? What stands out?
Oh, well, one of the great triumphs for me personally, of course, was becoming a QC. Because when I was a girl, there was a very famous woman QC, the first woman QC, Rose Howbrom, came from Liverpool. So she was a woman from Liverpool, and for some sort of subliminal idea that I had that if one woman from Liverpool could make it in the law, then maybe this woman from Liverpool could too. And to do that and to have my husband and children there, my mother and my father, was great. The other thing was that I happened to be probably one of the few QCs that the Queen has actually been able to personally congratulate on becoming one of her Queen's Counsel, because the day that it was announced that I was the list of the Queen's Counsel was announced was a day that, because Tony was leader of the opposition, the Queen had invited him to dinner at Windsor Castle. And so she was very kind and acknowledged the fact that I'd become a Queen's Counsel.
Is it a relief to be out of the headlines, not to see all the gossip? Because there's so much when you're in a position like, wife of the Prime Minister.
Yes, I think that one nice thing is to get some privacy back. It would be naive to think we've got total privacy back, that's for sure, but it's not quite as relentless as it used to be, and that is good.
Do you ever worry, I mean, with Tony Blair being so involved still in politics, including, for example, trouble spots like the Middle East, do you ever worry about the risks involved?
Well, I think, I wouldn't be human if I didn't worry about him. But on the other hand, I said I'm one of life's optimists, and I think that Tony has so much to offer, and it's such an important job that it's worth the risks, because I know he can make a difference.
What is there left for you to do? Any projects you've got outstanding you want to get done?
Well, I'm still, as you gathered, I'm very interested in trying to give women that economic independence, to help them set up their own businesses so that they can make more choices for themselves. We hear a lot about microfinancing and, women, it wasn't set up specifically for women, but women have done incredibly well at microfinancing. But when we go to see women moving on to take their businesses to a larger stage, employing other people rather than just their families, we find that women still find it really difficult to break into that small and medium-sized enterprise. And yet they're the businesses that really are the drivers of an economy. So trying to help women in the developing world get training, get advice, mentoring, networking to help them build their businesses and get even more economic independence is something that I'm trying to do now.
Because I can tell by your energy, you're not going to stop. So I hope your projects do go ahead the way you want them to. But how would you like to be remembered? I mean, God willing, you have a long life ahead of you. But if you leave behind a legacy, how would you like it to be?
Well, as a woman who tried to make a difference. And hopefully as a good mother and wife.
Cherie Blair, real pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.